Today I want to share with you the first of three powerful reasons why a former Baptist minister like me started keeping the Sabbath. This decision has deeply enriched my spiritual journey, and I hope my experiences can offer some insight or inspiration to you. The first is straightforward: Yahweh's commandments. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 to 11, we read, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your Elohim. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the seventh day and made it holy." A question began to nag at me for several years. I follow the other commandments, don't I? I honor my parents. I don't commit murder or steal, and so on. And it's not just because they're the law or the right thing to do. I obey these because Yahweh commanded them. And I want to be obedient. So why not the Sabbath? I asked myself. I honestly did not have a good answer. My only explanation came from what I had been taught, perhaps by a Christian preacher. All my life, I've been taught, read, and listened to many sermons that told me as Christians, we don't have to keep the Sabbath. Here's the uncomfortable truth. I too, as a minister, have perpetuated the idea through Sunday school teachings and in other forms that we don't have to observe the Sabbath, or that any day can be your Sabbath. I was misleading people, not intentionally, not because of personal study and revelation, but because that's what I've been taught myself. The two main scriptures people use, and I will use this to justify this belief, is Acts chapter 20, verse 7, and Romans chapter 14. So I just believed them and never truly fact-checked by reading, studying, and praying over the scriptures myself until recent years. Yahweh has since revealed to me a correct understanding of Acts chapter 20 and 7 and Romans chapter 14 within its proper context. I'll discuss Acts chapter 20 and 7 here briefly. As sunset marked the end of the Sabbath, Paul and his companions began their customary observance. Gathering with Paul until midnight on this transition from the last day of the week to the first day of the week were his disciples or companions, which included two Gentiles, Tychicus and Trophimus. Remember that according to the Bible or Hebrew custom, a day begins in the evening and ends the following evening. Therefore, the transition from the end of the seventh day around 7 p.m., depending on the sunset, to the start of the first day, which would also be around 7 p.m., would have occurred while Paul and his disciples were gathered together. It's similar to staying up all Friday night, starting a movie at 11:30 p.m. and watching it until 1 a.m. on Saturday. So as the Sabbath, the seventh day, ended in the evening, as specified in verse 6, Paul and his companions were gathered together on that same evening, which marks the beginning of the first day, as specified in verse 7. According to Jewish custom, around 7 p.m. during this immediate transition from the Sabbath to the first day of the week, Paul and his companions would have participated in a joyful Havdalah celebration or a Sabbath meal. They shared a special meal, deepening their fellowship. Teachings and encouragements flowed freely amongst them. It was during this gathering that Paul miraculously healed a young man who had fallen from a window. Their time in Troas complete, Paul and his disciples set out for the nearby city of Assos. Several points also need clarification regarding Romans chapter 14. Some interpret Paul as saying you can freely choose to obey or disregard the fourth commandment, Sabbath. However, as we'll explore later, Yeshua, Paul, and the early Jerusalem church all observed the Sabbath. This highlights the importance of careful interpretation to avoid taking scripture out of context. Focusing on the entire chapter is key. As a serious student, after reading Romans 14 in its entirety, do you get the impression from a few verses in the middle that Paul instructs everyone to decide for themselves about the Sabbath? Obey it, abolish it, it's up to you? Absolutely not. This chapter concerns matters of conscience, specifically food restrictions and possibly a traditional observance day. Some felt obligated to follow these practices, while others felt free to do different based on their conscience. Paul emphasizes that those who observe the day should do so with Yahweh in mind, and those who don't shouldn't be judged. Here's the breakdown. Observe the day, do it for Yahweh. Don't observe the day, don't be judged. The key is mutual respect, not judgment. Just like you, I've heard countless times that the Sabbath's ownership is Israel's. In other words, a Jewish Sabbath. However, Scripture itself clarifies ownership of the Sabbath. Yahweh in Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 12 declares, "And I also gave them my Sabbaths, to be a sign between them and me, to know that I am Master who sanctifies them." This verse has a profound impact on me. Nevertheless, in these last days, some from the natural olive tree and wild olive tree are being grafted in among Israel by belief in the Messiah and are saints of Elohim. The fourth commandment is a clear directive to honor the Sabbath as a holy day of rest and worship. The book of Jubilees provides much more detail on the origins of the Sabbath. Now, I'm well aware of the centuries-long theological debate regarding it being canonical. F. Bruce, in his book, The Canon of Scripture, even notes that some religious groups once considered it canonical, but that's a topic for another time. One particular profound point about the Sabbath in the book of Jubilees comes from chapter 2, verse 30. It says, "On this day we kept Sabbath in the heavens before it was made known to any flesh to keep Sabbath thereon on the earth." This passage emphasizes the heavenly origin of the Sabbath. But who is the we the scripture refers to? It likely refers to the Father and the Son, as supported by Colossians chapter 1 and verse 17, and John chapter 1 verses 1 and 14. Moreover, the importance of following these commandments is emphasized by Yeshua in John chapter 14, verse 15 and 21. He says, "If you love me, you shall guard my commands. He who possesses my commands and guards them, it is he who loves me." The Sabbath is not part of the Mosaic law. Some argue that the abolishment of the Mosaic law eliminates the Sabbath. However, the Sabbath predates Moses. It began on earth the seventh day of creation, as mentioned in Genesis, and in heaven as mentioned in the book of Jubilees. Mark chapter 2 verse 27 further clarifies this point. The Sabbath was made for man. Interestingly, the Bible doesn't mention Elohim creating anything physical on the seventh day. But Yahweh did make something on the seventh day. What did he make? He made the Sabbath itself on earth. This all suggests the Sabbath existed before Abraham, Moses, and even Mount Sinai. The discussion of the Sabbath with Moses in Exodus likely served as a reminder, not an initiation. Therefore, claiming the Mosaic law's abolishment eliminates the Sabbath is a misinterpretation. By observing the Sabbath, I am aligning my actions with my faith and love for Yahweh, demonstrating my commitment to his commandments. It's a commitment to obedience. The Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments, a core part of the covenant between Yahweh to his people. Choosing to observe it demonstrates your love and willingness to follow his instructions. It's a way of saying, your will, not mine, be done. If this message has inspired you, please share it with your family and friends. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like or follow Saving Grace Torah Ministries on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. Peace, blessings, and joy from Dr. Christopher Rogers.